Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Alex Saleh, Managing Partner of GLA & Co. and today's moderator. Thank you for joining us for the session on Kuwait PPP market and how to achieve bankability. Our purpose today is practical, to connect the policy and legal framework that governs PPPs in Kuwait with the financing realities that determine whether a project actually closes. We will ground the discussion in Kuwait's current pipeline and market practice, how projects are procured and approved, what lenders consider a bankable security, and a step-in package under Kuwait law, how termination and substitution regimes work in practice, and how to plan around the unique post-IPO shareholding and governance model. In short, we aim to move beyond theory and into the mechanics that investors, lenders, and contracting authorities need to align from day one. Kuwait's PPP framework, anchored in Law Number 116 of 2014 and its executive regs, were designed to blend transparency and competition with broad citizen participation. For larger projects, the model see a Kuwait project company where the successful investor holds a significant minority, public entities hold a defined tranche, and 50% is ultimately offered to Kuwait citizens via IPO. That ownership design has implications for governance, for the security package available to lenders, and for enforcement and step-in rights, topics that we will unpack today. The market track record is growing, the documentation has matured, and the forthcoming procurements in sectors such as power, water, and digital infrastructure are creating a timely opportunity to standardize bankable positions and compress timelines. We will also address areas where Kuwait's civil law environment differs from regional expectations and how transactions have bridged these gaps. For example, how to structure receivable assignments and accounts control from day one, how to align share pledge entry and enforcements with higher committee approvals, how to calibrate Article 2600 direct administration events so they function as a government risk with defined relief, and if prolonged, termination compensation that protects senior debt, and how to document lender step-in and substitution so service continuity is safeguarded without compromising enforceability. With this framing, I'm delighted to introduce our panel. First, we have Engineer Nayef Al-Haddad, Manager of Research and Strategic Planning at the Kuwait Authority for Partnership Projects. CAP is the engineer room of the program, defining the pipeline, running the competitions, and coordinating higher committee approvals. Nayef will speak to the state of the market today and priorities for the next 12 to 24 months. Refreshing bankable projects, tightening stage gates, increasing local capital market participation, and standardizing templates. Next, Sheikh Abdullah Al-Sabah from the Kuwait Direct Investment Promotion Authority. KDIPA sits at the intersection of policy and capital, and its mandate is central to the conversation of foreign investment in PPPs, licensing scope, incentives, substance requirements, and how KDIPA interacts with the PPP shareholding model. We will ask him to set out how KDIPA views 100% foreign ownership request in structures that also include the citizens' IPO tranche and public entity participation, and what practical guardrails apply. Finally, from GLA, we will have a couple practitioners as well. As a quick background to GLA, we're a regional Middle East law firm with over 170 lawyers spread out among all 6 GCC jurisdictions in Egypt, specializing only in Arab civil law with full practice in 9 main areas. In addition, me being an old guy, I've had the opportunity to lead on a couple of the early PPP projects in Kuwait, including Azur 1 and Al-Himan wastewater. At the current time, GLA is involved pretty much in every major PPP project in the country on either sponsor or project lender side. I can personally say in my 30 years in the region that the projects practice has never been as vigorous and active in Kuwait as it has in the past 18 to 24 months. Truly a glorious time for those who love projects. Now, getting back to our GLA practitioners. First, we have Ashraf Hindi, partner and head of banking and finance, who will address what lenders can realistically expect in Kuwait's security and step-in architecture compared with regional norms, where the perimeter is narrow, and how transactions have nonetheless been repeatedly banked through receivables assignment, accounts control, robust direct agreements, and substitution mechanics, and debt protective termination regimes. We also have Mohammed Al-Awadi, legal director, who will take us into the documentation details. assignments and approvals under the PPP law, bilingual drafting, arbitration considerations, post-IPO governance and reserved matters, and the sequencing of approvals that, if planned early, prevent schedule slippage at financial close. Our structure today is straightforward. We will begin with the market update and priority with CAP, move to KDIPA's perspective on investment licensing and incentives alongside the PPP ownership model, then turn to the financing toolkit, security, step-in, termination, and enforceability, and close with a practical bankable checklist you can lift into your next RFP clarification. We'll anchor these points to precedent projects and accepted positions to give you a clear picture of what is already working in the Kuwait market. As we go through the panel questions and answers and discussions, please feel free to put in questions in the chat room. We're going to try to get to some of them. If we can't get to them all within the hour, we promise to get to them afterwards, but we want this to be interactive. Again, thank you again for being with us. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Engineer Nayev.
Thank you, Alex. I would like to thank GLA for this opportunity. It's great to focus. This is like a golden year right now for the PPPs, like going in the region. We're seeing a lot of activity. We've seen a lot of countries. I'm speaking not only on behalf of Kuwait, but also on the region, the GCC and the MENA region, as part of WAP, the World Association for PPP Units. We've been observing the changes, how the pipelines are progressively advancing in Saudi Arabia and Dubai and Qatar as well. And in Kuwait, we can see right now there's a huge rush of projects down the pipeline. So if you could maybe give me at least 5 to 7 minutes to tell you about what's happening right now. Currently, I'm just gonna break it down into what's being tendered, in the procurement process, and what's upcoming, just to give everybody I would say an insight and down in the near future and beyond that. Now, currently in the pipeline, that has been tendered, we talk about the fiber optics project. It's a huge one. We talk about a 50 years investment into the whole fiber networks of Kuwait. We're right now evaluating the financial bid. We have received 3 bids. We're reviewing the financials of it. We talk about Azure, the second and the third phase. And thankfully, we have signed a letter agreement right now. We have started the process of the incorporation of the project company. We're aiming that, at least before the end of the year, that we would sign the PPP agreements and the power purchase agreement for this project. And we talk about a huge project. I've seen more than around 10 to 12 banks, mostly locals, financing and lending for this project, which is just, and Islamic financing institutions are part of it as well. So finally, we see Islamic financing contributing to PPPs finally here in Kuwait. We have the Shigaya project. We have 2 phases right now. One of them has already been floated for its RB. We're waiting for the bids. The second one, maybe it was it was on Sunday that we have made the announcement that the RFB for the second one, which is a 500 megawatts, the first one is 1100 megawatts. This has been floated. I haven't seen so much competition coming into the list of the qualified bidders and the consortiums that's coming in. We talk about variety. We're having people from Vietnam. We have people from Turkey. We have people from almost everywhere. And that's a good sign that says, there's a genuine global interest into investing into Kuwait. We have Al Kiran, which is another ITPPP, project. 1,800 minimum of installed capacity that's already been floated, and it's we're waiting for the bids from 5 qualified bidders. We have right now, actually, we have received bids for the Souk Shark, which is it's a strip mall by the marina side. That's one. And we have the Muthanna complex, which we have received bids. We're right now evaluating them. And we talk about these are real estate retendering with development, for these projects. What's down right now, I'm gonna mention, are the pipeline project, which will be up for requesting transaction advisory. We talk about feasibility studies / tender documents. So actually, the first one is gonna be the Kuwait Postal Office Services. That's something interesting. We have a very we'd like to improve the postal service in Kuwait. I know that the postal services and the logistics are carried right now mostly, generally, more than 80% are by private companies. Now is the time to get back on the line, just like, in other countries that they have, like, great postal services. We have a new project, which is, I would say, involved with social infrastructure with the Supreme Council for Literature, Arts, and which is utilizing 3 historical sites in Kuwait. We talk about like Mishraf Palace. We talk about like the old chest disease hospitals, like in the heart of the city. And we talk about like, part of like Al Mubarakia will be utilized to renovate these historical sites, maintain it, and use it as hubs for, we talk about like upcoming SMEs. We talk about like, fostering, it's going to be focused on what we call knowledge economy. And it's going to be giving a lot of opportunities for upcoming projects and new sectors of like, what's happening in the business. 2 projects we're working with KDIPA, with dear Sheikh, is going to be like working right now in current engagement. It's going to be in Wasi, free trading zone. It's going to be, that's the south of Kuwait, and Al Naayim economic zone as well. That's another, so 2 zones we're working with KDIPA, and we're making progress on that. And that's going to be floated. I'm talking about like either this quarter or the next quarter. And lastly, I have something which is finally we're breaking through with like, the major infrastructure and targeting a segment of the population. We talk about like Al Sabah Al Ahmed recreational resort for like the elderly. That's going to be one that's going to be taking care of the elderly as for recreation, therapy, hospitality, etc. So these expect like, for everybody who's listening to this right now, if it's not going to be this quarter, it's going to be the next quarter. You're going to see announcements requesting transaction advisory services. And that's from my side. Thank you, Alex.
Amazing. That's a lot of activity. When do you sleep?
Yeah. That's not only me. I mean, like, thankfully, like we have a great team here. Like, mostly, and we mostly, I would say, equal in gender equality. We have like more than 90% of Kuwaiti nationals, like young force, which is just like give us a lot of hope and potential to attract investment into Kuwait, to see like the potential in the population here.
Amazing. Sheikh Abdullah, in general, you handle the foreign direct investment in here, allowing for greater opportunities for foreign companies who are going to give back to the country. I'd love to hear, generally about KDIPA and its where it connects with CAP.
Great. First of all, it is a pleasure to be here and again with my colleagues. I believe, as Engineer Naif said, there is a lot of changes going on. There is a lot of businesses growing in Kuwait right now due to a huge change of direction, focusing on international businesses with the support of the local private businesses. So we are attracting more investors. Recently, we announced a lot of investment companies like Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, and so on. Those companies are in Kuwait right now, full board. So even the meeting of their boards are happening in Kuwait yesterday. So this shows you that Kuwait right now going through a huge change, attracting more investors, attracting that attention of not only the region, big companies, whether it's from Asia, Europe, or the state. I'll start my presentation on a brief about KDIPA and what we are actually doing and our requirement to have a licensed company and operation under our law. So KDIPA law introduced in 2013, which will be updated soon, hopefully. Within the next few months, we have a huge update on the law and regulation. I'll just explain the current situation right now. Will take no more than 30 days to issue you a license. We established a one-stop shop and extended an incentive and guarantees. We shifted to a negative list. So we don't, in Kuwait, usually we don't have free zones. You can operate 100% owned company by foreigner in any place in Kuwait. There is no designated location or specific location that you can operate in. Those are the forms of the company, which is a Kuwaiti company, whether it is limited liability, single person company, or a closed shareholding company, plus branch and representative office, which you may enter the market without engaging in any commercial activity for a year or two to study the market, to see the opportunities, to engage with the local private sector and the local government entity to see their pipeline. Some people doesn't know about the Kuwait market, have an outdated history. They would like to see, to check themselves. They are always welcome to open an office, will be sponsored under KDIPA, to study the market, get in touch with government entity, get a feeling of the market itself. And after that, they can switch to fully operational company. This will require no obligation on the entity itself, no requirement. We can issue that in a week or so. Those are some of our negative lists, one of the shortest negative lists. Every other activity can be practiced under KDIPA law, except those activities. And some of them will be hopefully in the especially the real estate, after issuing the new law of allowing foreigners to own their own real estate in designated area. This hopefully will be changed. This, especially in section L, for the real estate activity, if you are a developer, you are most welcome to be in the country and develop urban areas. In order to hopefully submit your application, it is only 4 steps to submit your application. You have to fulfill some of our criteria, which will be explaining in my next slides. Just fill your application, submit it through our portal, and then you can obtain the license and start working in the market within a month. Those are our economic zone. As Engineer Naif said, we have an Ain, which will be hopefully handled by the PPP. We have Al Abdili economic zone, which is on the north of Kuwait, next to Iraqi border. And the Wafra economic zone also. Without mentioning the 3 zones that we are developing, those are the zones owned by KDIPA and solely owned by KDIPA, which will be ready to invest in. Adding to that, we do have in the next few months a ready land for any investor who is interested to be in the industry park in Shidadiyah. We have around 250,000 square meters ready with infrastructure, which will be hopefully for a certain activity. For example, pharmaceutical, logistic, will be welcomed in this zone. This hopefully will be announced in the next few months. The land are ready. We're just waiting for official documentation of subleasing the land from Public Authority of Industries. With this, I will end my presentation. I would say today we have a great potential, not only in certain sector or a PPP. We have a great opportunity to partnership with the private sector, and public sector will be regulating without any interference, will be supporting without any direct engagement and direct restriction. You will be freely practicing your business inside Kuwait. You will see the whole country supporting direct investments. Huge company like in the IT sector, Microsoft, Google, AWS are joining the market right now, building data centers, building other facility. Those huge company needs their supply chain to be available in the market to save them and to save the country. We have long-term contract with those huge company. It is a partnership, and we are shifting right now from an reactive economy to interactive economy, where we shape the new era of the whole MENA region. Of course, any questions, any other inquiries, I'll be available to answer any question. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sheikh Abdullah. That's very helpful. And, I can say clients, when they are looking to set up through KDIPA or just to establish in the country, that's one of the first questions is, Alex, tell me how long is it going to take before we get approval? So having this fast track, I think will be a game changer in the country, to be quite honest.
I'll just add to that, Alex. Usually we are stuck right now with huge firms. I remember one of the huge firms, their process of approvals took months. Where in Kuwait, we take it much faster than they do. So right now, their decision process and attesting all papers, certifying all papers, for our home country does take a long time.
Right.
Which in KDIPA, we usually fast forward that to accept only copies. Once their paper are ready, they can also proceed with the application. So I hope we'll meet their targets and their expectation in KDIPA.
Absolutely. No, it's very helpful. Thank you so much. And that's and within the context of PPP, the consortium company that sets up as 100% owned or could have minority Kuwait ownership is going through you, and the project company itself. And I think, there's this great intersection in terms of how the two interplay together. Well, that's extremely helpful. And I think at this point, it'll be good just to get in some good questions in terms of what do we see. And the questions we brought up are questions that are being raised generally by either sponsor or lender side, generally on each project. So what we've tried to do is condense those questions into the ones that are repeatedly asked, so we could try to get that information out to our audience as one. And Ashraf, one of the questions that always comes in is by the project lenders side is, what kind of security package can we put in? They may be used to what's done normally in the West or in Asia, or even closer to home like Saudi or UAE. But tell us about what you can normally expect with the security package here from a PPP perspective under just general Kuwait law and based on Article 23 of the PPP law.
So yeah, Alex, that's a very important question. Actually, in Kuwait, like all the region, there are certain parameters for the security package that can be taken by lenders, and this has been repeatedly banked throughout the years in transactions. So if we are talking about collaterals, there are a lot of collaterals in addition to some contractual rights that amount to collaterals as well. So in terms of a security package, we can say the two most important things is a pledge on the shares of the project company and a commercial mortgage. So in respect of a pledge, you can take a pledge on the shares that are owned by the consortium holding company, of course, subject to the approval of the higher committee of CAP. There can be no pledge on the shares owned by the government, represented by the ministry, the competent ministry, or even the shares that are owned by Kuwaiti citizens. That's, of course, cannot be taken. In terms of commercial mortgage, this is allowed under the PPP law. It's explicitly allowed under the PPP law. The key feature here, as we were talking yesterday with Naif, is in relation to the distinction between public assets and private assets. In Kuwait, as with all civil law countries, there is a distinction between public and private assets. And public assets are generally those assets that are designated for a public utility. So this comes to, at the time of the perfection, the distinction between public and private assets is what delineates between which assets you can put a commercial mortgage on and which assets you can. In terms of other security package, you have assignment of receivables that can be permitted from day one under the EPC contract, under the O&M, the operation and maintenance agreement, under the offtake agreement as well. All assignment of receivables are allowed. A pledge on bank accounts also is allowed. The only exception in relation to Kuwait is the real property. So any real estate cannot be, because you know that this is not an ownership; it's a lease agreement that are taken that involves some rights taken by the investor in favor of the to develop the project throughout a number of years. So there is no ownership by the project company on the real estate, the land and the buildings.
And just to interrupt you for a second, Ashraf. Naif, you made a good point yesterday about the
yeah, I would like to intercept on that. Okay, right. So I'm okay. Sometimes I had to wear the hat of the private sector. That's part, like, in a PPP unit should be a matchmaker. Yeah. So you try to bring and like being fairly. And speaking, and I know some people here like from the banking sector, and they'll be thinking like, yeah, you got it. I mean, like the pledge over like the shares or like, the receivables, it's peanuts money compared to the capex of the project.
Yeah.
I'm talking like the whole, like a power plant or something. Yeah. Talking like, initially. So I worked out like in the last signed project, not the one right now on the table, like for like, the previous one, as a matter, because it had a lot of risks associated with it. We talk about like, I'm talking like the wastewater treatment plant, Hayman project. It had two PPP systems. We talk about like a TDO and a BOT. There's a lot of associated risk with it, a lot of issues with it. So we managed to get from FATWA, which is the state legal department or advisory department, and in consideration that there is an ownership over the assets, I'm talking about like the project assets, but it's going to be a temporary ownership over the tenor of the project, the tenor of the signed tenor of the project. And that made sense. As long as like, the project company is maintaining, is part of the deal, adhering to it, both parties adhering to all the terms, everything's going fine. During the whole time, as long as it's within the private sector hand, that's going to be, that's what belongs to them. Because, the whole concept about like, the project, because at the end there's a T, it's a transfer. So what are they transferring? They're transferring the assets. Who's the custodian the whole time? Who's managing? It's a plain sense, So this is just my 2 cents on the topic.
Yeah.
So because one of the issues always comes down to that we're being asked, can we put that commercial premises pledge against the assets of the project company? And getting that positive response, I think, bodes extremely well for the market and from a bankability perspective.
I came across some kind of trials, which is in some places. I've seen some places like one bank was financing a single unit, a single generator within a block of generators, but just it doesn't make sense.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense. It's like unit one is just Islamically financed, and the rest are just like, it doesn't make sense. So like, and we cannot take like a bar station and say like, this is up for like, pledging, and this is not. I mean, like we talk about like a whole thing. We talk about like the whole component. That's what it comes in,
100%.
But also, it's good to clarify also for the lease rights, Naif. We didn't raise this up yesterday, but usually the RFP, it doesn't allow the assignment of lease rights. But some say that during the project, in order to allow for the step-in rights to be fully operative, that you can have some rights on the lease afterwards.
Well, you have to look at it this way. I mean, like, for example, it has to come through also like, the bidders themselves. They would estimate, say, like, you know what? this project cannot be bankable without, A and Y and B. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And some project, I mean, like the real estate development, the re-tendering of these are existing assets.
Yeah.
These are existing assets that, like you can see the forecast all ahead, but when you talk about like a new power plant with a huge capex, then you would need such kind of securities to be in place.
Okay. I think that's, very helpful. Because we always go through this in detail, exactly what can be assigned, what can be collateralized, and so forth. And I think we've made a lot of ground, and I think we've established precedent in this area. As just want to ask a quick question to Sheikh Abdullah. As these companies get established and whatnot, the consortium company and the project company itself within the context of a PPP, I'd like to talk about what are some incentives and exemptions, from a tax or otherwise perspective that KDIPA is seeing in terms of what can be offered to them.
Of course, let me start with this. NPP project, KDIPA support 100% founder ownership. The investor could establish a Kuwaiti vehicle. I wouldn't say not the PPP company, because it is a publicly announced and you are a direct investment, which must usually keep legality or non 50% citizen or a public entity. The investor participate in a company can be fully owned by a foreigner, plus giving them a tax exemption, custom exemption, supporting them with all government entity. Will not stop only on that. We do have an aftercare services. I would say we support any entity that support or any investor that support our vision, whether it's a PPP project or a direct investment, from issuing their visa till any obstacle facing with banks, finance, any other government entity. So from A to Z, they will have our full support. Even right now, currently, if you are not established in the KDIPA and you are struggling with the tendering process in Kuwait, we could help and support with that without even licensing under KDIPA. So we think our role is not only supporting a specific company that licensed under KDIPA. No, I think our role is to support the whole investment climate in Kuwait. Will not stop or leave someone who entered the market struggle by his own. We are here to support as a government. You don't need any more agents to be representing you. You can rely on the government entities to support and to help in any obstacle. I saw one of the questions regarding the merge with PPP. Some people are confused sometimes. Where we go? We start with MOSI, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, or we start with the PPP, or I think the three parties does complement each other. And we believe there is, as I said, in the next few months, there is a huge shift in law. One of the ideas is to merge PPP, practicing their own law. I think they are shortly introducing an exceptional new law that will be merged under KDIPA umbrella. And also the Silk City, putting in mind another authority will be established soon, will handle the economic zone, the free zones, and some private other zones. Most of them will be merged under one structure, just to unify the support and to make it more smooth. I would say a smooth sailing toward establishing your company in Kuwait. You'll not be going to an authority, then shifting to another one to establish an entity, then shifting to Ministry of Commerce and Industry no, all of them will be unified under one umbrella. even the commercial license itself. So in the near future, things will be more sufficient, we will deal with more efficiency as a government, as a whole government, not separate entity. And we will support all efforts to enhance and to develop our economy.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, that's very helpful. Now, just moving on to the documentation. One of the issues that always comes up, when they see the documentation or they look at the law is Mohammed Al-Awadi, the Article 26 event about it being a hindered project. And this was a nice one of internal discussion too we had with Engineer Naif as well recently. But maybe you can talk a little bit about what it means to be an Article 26 event. When does it come into play? And then I'd love to hear from Engineer Naif in terms of how he connects that to Article 25, because I think that's a very rational way of looking at this.
Yeah. So an Article 26 event is not a defined term in the PPP law itself. It is rather a contractual shorthand, often used to refer to the statutory concept. An Article 26, where a project has failed or is hindered, with the detailed failure criteria set out in the implementation regulations. Under Article 26, if the project fails and the project company does not remove the reason of failure or hindrance within the contractual cure period, the Supreme Committee or Higher Committee may decide to place the project under the management of the public entity or another specialized company. All will be under the authority's supervision. Management is conducted in the name and for the account of the contracting investor. The project company remains liable for breach, and the substitute manager is liable for mismanagement. This is an intern continuity of the agreement, and is not considered to be an automatic termination. This ends when either the failure is removed or the project is liquidated. Now, when we talk about Article 26, we talk about the SISA agreement or the step-in and substitution. Under Article 26, the government can step in, and then the lenders also can step in under the SISA, and they both operate coordinated by this SISA agreement. If an Article 26 circumstance also triggers a project company default, the public entity may implement inter-management to ensure continuity. But this must be without prejudice to the lender's right. The SISA should also provide lenders with notice, cure, and standstill periods, during which termination or irreversible actions are paused so the lenders can cure or substitute the investor. If the lenders elect to substitute, government management scales back and structured handover occurs. Project costs of inter-management remains for the project company's account, and lender security is preserved. So with our discussion yesterday, also Engineer Naif has talked about how this reads out with Article 25 and also Article 51 of the executive regulations. So he had a very interesting point to point out.
Yeah, Naif, because they always come back and say, well, what does that mean to be hindered, and who hinders it? Is it something from a third party or whatnot? But your explanation in terms of how Article 25 is a bit related, I think adds a lot of color.
Alex, I'm looking at the law. It has like 48 articles, and they only take out like the only 2 bad ones. They don't look at the rest, I'm sorry, but like, how picky is the private sector? Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So if you look at it, actually, I'm not satisfied with how the order of the articles. I mean, like the articles should have been 26, which is about like the stepping in should come before the substitution. The order like here is just kind of messed up, honestly. That was like a kind of drafting thing. So Article 25 talks about substitution, which happens as the end, as the final point of no return, right?
Yep.
But the stepping in is like an intervention. When you have somebody having a problem, you intervene, right? So in order to I know everybody's like to raise flags and talk about like, how associated risks are, but like when you talk about like intervention, that means I have to be ready at all times, jumping at any minute and say like, oh, well, you slipped, I'm gonna, that's gonna happen.
Right.
I mean, the state with this capacity, with this mobility, it's not gonna happen at any kind of, I'm talking about like any kind of company breaching the law. You don't find like a police officer that's wait at the side of the corner just waiting to bust you. You don't see that happening, right? So it's the same kind of case. But the thing about it is, it's potentially it's gonna happen sometime or another. In the first signed PPP contract, the state defaulted on the first payment because the state wasn't used to pay the private sector. The state defaulted. And the private sector was understandably knowing that it may happen.
Right. Because
it's a process. It's an intergovernmental process that has to be aligned. And the same case, vice versa, You don't want to ruin, I would say, maybe a lifetime of like 2 to 3 years of tendering and procurement negotiating just to wait to slip in at the first minute. So we talk about like something which is material, something that would make an impact, something we talk about like, I'm talking about like a total shutdown of the facility that cannot get back online. There's a major malfunction or like, attributed to the company itself. We talk about like, bad management. We talk about like, failure, like there is no remedy. There's like mediation or coming to the agreement, And then when we talk about like the stepping in, which is going to happen at any kind of intervention, if everything has been remedied, then everybody goes back to their seat, right? But the substitution comes when like, this is it. And the substitution, don't forget, the problem is like a lot of people don't even like focus on it. It could happen from both parties, either by like, a request from CAP, which is, we talk about like during that time, CAP is owning the stakes, owning the shares during that time, or from like the public entity who's a counterparty in the agreement, or by the lenders. Now the lenders could request with Sabah. And that's something that, how the Kuwaiti law has also addressed how to protect the interests of the private sector if the SPV company is slipping out of business. And in the end, if you read the end of the Article 25, you look at it like the way it says, a public entity cannot just go ahead and terminate a project.
Right.
This article regulated that you cannot terminate unless you have a final arbitral award.
So there's probably
because you can't just say like on a whim, I want to terminate an airport or I want to terminate a waste management plant,
Right. Makes sense. It's basically you're saying there's proper checks and balances put in place before you get to that point. Okay, wonderful. Next, because I know we're running up against the clock right now. We're always asking us, please, can you opine what does this Article 19 about termination of a public interest mean? How do we interpret that? Has it ever going to happen? Will it ever happen? It has to be based on public interest, and so how do you view Article 19 and the language that we see in a lot of the documentation about termination for a public interest situation, and is it really something to get yourself worked up about?
Yeah, I just want to answer this without drawing much attention from engineering Naif, because I know he will comment on this article as well. But let me say the public interest termination event is something that is a contractual right for the public authority to terminate the PPP project agreement if approved and justified in the public interest. Now, Article 19 doesn't define the public interest exhaustively. So it is a broad concept that is assessed based on the facts and must be substantiated, of course. Now, the public authority cannot terminate by itself. It has to take the approval of the higher committee of CAP before terminating. And there are guarantees, of course, in the procedure. So, for example, they have to serve a notice, which is typically 30 days. And in this notice, they have to specify which public interest event occurred. They have to put a specific date. They have to put any overarching requirements on termination by the public entity. So these are the process which has some guarantees in relation to the mechanism, how it is managed, the termination. The other thing is the compensation upon termination. There is a compensation, and the compensation is triggered subject to whether the event occurred before the operation date or after the operation date. So we always have a definition of both incidents. But in all cases, the termination for public interest triggers termination purchase price payable by the public entity to the generator.
I just sorry to interrupt you. I know Sheikh Abdullah has to leave for an outstanding appointment, so we're going to let him depart, and I'm going to let you continue, Ashraf. Sorry for that.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm sorry to interrupt, Ashraf. I think it is a valid point. The public interest. Just if you know any example that this happened in Kuwait, just let us know.
What? Exactly. I haven't seen it happen in 30 years, to be honest.
You have to get out of here.
I tell people look at it and say, well, we can quantify the risk. Yeah, you have the law. But then I always say, okay, but ask me how many times in 30 years I've seen it actually in any type of context. It's just, but it needs to be there. But I'll let you continue, Ashraf, because I think you have to look at precedent, not just look at the law.
Yeah, I'll leave Engineer Naif comment at the end, because I think he told us.
You said you didn't want me to comment.
You told the story about the opposite situation, which is continuing the project for public interest. So I know that there is always in front of you the interest of the project and the economy in general to continue the project. So just last thing about termination for public interest, that there is always a compensation in accordance with whether this was made before the operation date or after the operation date. And always the compensation regime is structured to ensure that the senior debt and the accrued interest are paid off. So that's a big concern for the lenders always, but that's the case. That has been the case in all cases. Now, termination for public grounds, the last thing is different from two things, different from any fault-based termination. So this is an exercise of a sovereign or public policy discretion. This is not a breach remedy. The second thing is not a force majeure. The public entity chooses to terminate the public policy for public policy reasons. And the compensation level mirrors always the government risk termination rather than any fault-based outcomes. So as we said, it always, the price or the compensation price always factors in the senior debt and its interest. And of course, there are drafting points to take in consideration in the project agreements, such as the termination price and costs associated with that, and whether any hedge break costs are applicable, and aligning these with the step-in or substitution arrangements. Yeah.
Naif, anything to add on that, or are we good to go?
No, I'm all good, but I'm saying, thank you, Sheikh Abdullah, for pointing out when was the last time it happened. Actually, in the way, you talk about a text that was made in 2014, right? Now, 2014 is different from 2025. Right now, currently, the whole globe, not only this region, not only this country, the whole globe is towards engaging the private sector. We're seeing PPPs spreading like Bitcoins, hopefully, So everyone's going that way. We see that article is just what some advisors put as a disclaimer, in the bottom says we're not responsible for the accuracy whatsoever. That's a disclaimer.
Right.
That's the ceiling. That's the ceiling limit of how far the statement may go in, But I haven't seen a successful kind of nationalization of like such a kind of project takes place. What was the last one? Maybe like the Swiss Canal or something. Everything like, I mean, like why the state is going to the private sector?
Right.
Because it's either like, the high cost that they're using, the deficiency, the lack of capacity, and the state should take like the role of the regulator. It shouldn't be involved like with doing the servers. If we left the telecom, like for example, those telecom operators, if they're still within the state, we wouldn't have reached like 3G by now, like maybe 4G.
Yeah.
It's a progressive technological world, and that should be with somebody who has the money to spend on R&D, the one person who's like utilizing these like I would say human capacities. And believe me, so like I don't see it. Yeah, it's there. The article's there. You cannot deny it. But then the state is not willing to engage in that. Actually, it's been placed there. But like you can see it almost everywhere.
Right.
In many jurisdictions you'll be seeing it, but we haven't seen anything that I've seen actually in one place. It happened in 2013. It backfired on the state because it was a national state at the right time. There was a coup in that state. It's like I think it was Mali. Okay, there was a coup, and they thought it was like a corrupted deal. It backfired. They lost the arbitration. The state ended up and getting like international debt to pay off the arbitration award. So they lost the project, and they lost a lot of money, and they had ended up like taking loans on the state to pay off the award.
Right.
So yeah, it doesn't usually work out that time.
No, understood. Well noted. Mohammed, obviously another deep area where we get a lot of questions and what happens and how does it play out comes with respect to the sovereign immunity and the foreign arbitration and governing law questions. It's an Article 29 question under the PPP law, but it's also a general Kuwait civil and commercial procedure law in terms of governing law disputes, enforcement. What's your position on this?
Okay, Alex. So first of all, we have to differentiate between two main aspects. One of which is foreign arbitration, and the other is immunity and attachment on state-owned assets. So what we try to do initially is we try to get foreign arbitration in any PPP deal. So for that to be applicable, we first have to get a special resolution from the Council of Ministers for the deal to have a foreign arbitration clause. So after you get that, then you can have foreign arbitration. Obviously, Kuwait is a signatory to the New York Convention for Arbitration. You get your and then you domesticate it in Kuwait. After domestication, then starts the execution process. A lot of entities ask about, can we attach on state-owned assets, on state companies, on ministries? So Article 216 of the Civil and Commercial Procedures Law is very straightforward. Any Kuwait state-owned asset cannot be attached. And this is a territorial immunity, so this only applies to territory and Kuwait territory. So how can we execute? Initially, we've had a lot of disputes with ministries and other government-owned entities, and they always honor final contracts or final arbitral awards. So that's the initial thing. And even if they don't, Kuwait has tightened the grip on any non-execution of a final binding arbitral award or judgment.
This was seen, law, right, Mohammed?
Yeah. So this is seen in the law that was stipulated back in July, which further strengthens that, and which was also seen in the public prosecution's comment last week when asked on how long does a public servant have to execute a judgment. So when you have this judgment and you serve the notice of execution, the public servant will have 90 days to execute the judgment or arbitral award. If the 90 days lapses without them executing your amount, then the public servant, the minister, the undersecretary, or whomever is obstructing justice will face imprisonment of up to 2 years. We are now, as a firm, in the process. We have had a positive outcome in one of our cases against a local entity, a local government entity, and we have served the notice. As soon as you serve the notice, you would need a bit more than a month until that amount reaches your bank account. And from our experience with litigation, arbitration, or disputes as well, it is now much easier to get your money from the government after this new law is implemented than getting your money from a privately owned company.
Absolutely. That and you know that for me, that when I hear that, that's like a game changer. I mean, first of all, again, I can say this again because I'm an old guy, but in my 30 years, anytime we've received the full and final judgment, whether a court of appeals or a court of cassation, whether it's a state-owned entity or a ministry, it's always been paid off. Sometimes slow, but it's always been paid off. But when you add this new law that you talk about in terms of speed in 90 days, honestly, it's better than having a bank guarantee or a performance bond. I think it considerably strengthens any party that's dealing with an arm of the Kuwait government in terms of giving assurances and whatnot, that if it gets to that stage, there is going to be payoff. And I think that's something that needs to be highlighted by everybody, because it should give everyone extreme comfort in terms of what happens in that situation. So that's, and to me, it's you know, yes, we've always had this law that you can't attach, but when you factor in this law, there's huge incentives that once you've reached that stage, that there's going to be, it is going to be fully paid off. You know, we're counting down towards the end. You know, and I always look at my questions and think I've got 6 or 7 great questions I still like to get to. But I did see something about IPOs in terms of just generally what can we expect. We've only gone through the exercise once with Azure 1. Al-Himan is coming up soon. And it's, you know, it's an Article 13 question of the PPP law. We see IPOs, and this is something that's a little bit unique of the Kuwait PPP law compared to other jurisdictions where you don't have this public access and where the public's coming in. Is there anything, Nay, if you want to say for the projects that do?
I'm reading the question by Mr. Gabriel. Says, like, you know, we only have one president. What could be the risk of a failed IPO for the private party? Well, it's not initially at the first stage as an IPO. It's a closed private placement between the initial shareholders. We talk about, like, you know, CAP, like, you know, it's always been designated as a legal custodian of these shares on behalf of the public for the 50% during that period, the initial incorporation, all the way to the financial close. I mean, like, even we talk about, like, even all the way to the project completion date as a commercial operation, yeah? With the strategic partner, along with, it depends if it's like an IWPP or like a PPP law, there'll be public pension funds as well as like a sovereign funds, the local ones. You have Kuwait Investment Authority. We talk about like the social, what was it, like BEFs, you know, we talk about like Awqaf or like, you know, Zakat House. They will be on board with that one. So when that thing is done, what will happen, we'd like to call it an IPO, but like actually it's a transfer of shares.
Absolutely.
So CAP is telling everybody who's like, you know, like who's a local citizen, who's eligible, hey, this is your share. You willing to take it or not? Just pay the bar value and, like, you know, like the amount for like the transfer. That's it. So it's a secure thing. It's not gonna be like I would say like a kind of fundraising from day zero, like, you know. So like, yeah, I don't see any kind of risk actually. I see a lot of people just buying.
Right. No, I mean, I think there's the practical that I think it's a very low risk of it not being sold out. Quite honestly, because we do a lot of this work in Kuwait, and I see that there's a lot of cash on the sidelines looking for projects. But let's talk theoretical. In the event, you know, and I don't even like using the word IPO because you're right, it's not truly an IPO. It's really a listing coupled with a warehousing aspect, where CAP takes the shares, and then once we get to where to the next stage, then it actually sells them. So it's not truly an IPO, but that's the language we use.
Yeah.
The question is,
Well,
for whatever reason,
yeah, you see the last one, right?
I'm sorry.
I think the last one by Mr. Gabriel also, like he's following up on this
Yeah,
question.
the
Says-
concern is the requirement for the purchase party to purchase. Well, again, as we know, if it's a non-IWPP, it's not a requirement, but they get the offer. And if it is IWPP, well, they're putting in their bid price because the question is, Naif, is the requirement of the private party to purchase in the case of a failed. In other words, let's assume you only place 90% and 10% don't. What happens then?
Well, the law regulated that kind of thing and said, like, when they say, like, there's left shares which hasn't been taken by the public, the state would be holding it for that time to determine either, like, afforded. It depends on, like, each law and how it says, like, in the stipulation, and it's even regulated in the shareholders agreement of the company itself, like upon like signing. So everybody knows, like, in this case happens, what's going to happen.
Right. We do negotiate, and that's for Joe. We do negotiate these issues within the shareholders agreement in terms of implications in the event that it doesn't happen. Who's going to purchase? How it's going to be done? So you're right. The law by itself doesn't contemplate all the minutia of details, but this is where you would want the governing the relevant ministry when they enter into or CAP itself to contract within the SHA exactly what these issues are. And that's where you can negotiate to give protection. But the purchase will be made nonetheless. It's just a question of how it's going to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're at the 205 stage at this point so we're 5 minutes over. I think at this point, what we want to do is go back through the chat to see if there's any additional questions. We'll probably get back to them by email. There's probably 6 or 7 other issues we'd love to hit on. Maybe we'll have to do a second webinar because you can only get so much done in an hour. And I think there's been a significant amount of wonderful information from Engineer Naya, from Sheikh Abdullah in terms of what's going on. And hopefully we addressed at least a few of the points that we see that happen time and time again every time there's a new project, whether we're sponsor or lender side. We'll try to address other questions that come up within the chat. And we want to thank everyone for attending. I want to personally thank Sheikh Abdullah and Engineer Naya for attending, and our team members too. And I hope it was an enjoyable experience.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for giving this opportunity. Thanks for your interest. I thank everybody who has contributed and attended this. It's great to see, that PPPs are back in business and in big wheels,
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. We're going to sign off.
Thank you.